I sat at the dinner table as my parents, David and Linda, announced that my younger sister, Sarah, needed money for a new car since hers broke down. When I suggested Sarah get a job instead of another handout, my father's face hardened. "Sarah was born to live soft," he declared coldly. "Your job is to make money for her. You don't like it, there's the door." My fork clatters to my plate. 28 years of being the family ATM crashes down on me. The drive home from my parents' suburban Minneapolis house felt like an out-of-body experience. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white as my father's words echoed in my head. "Sarah was born to live soft. Your job is to make money for her." I had always known my family treated me differently than Sarah, but hearing it stated so bluntly felt like a physical blow to my chest. By the time I reached my downtown apartment, anger had replaced the initial shock. I threw my purse onto the kitchen counter and pulled out my phone with shaking fingers. If they wanted to play this game, I was going to show them exactly what they were losing. I opened my banking app and started taking screenshots of every automatic payment, every wire transfer, every so-called family emergency I had covered over the past 5 years. The numbers were staggering. $73,000. That's what I had given my family in the past 5 years alone. My parents' mortgage payment of $1,800 every month. Sarah's college loan payments of $450. Her car payment of $325. Their homeowner's insurance, property taxes, credit card minimum payments when they maxed out their limits on vacation trips and shopping sprees. I scrolled through transaction after transaction, each one labeled something innocent like family help or emergency assistance. But now I saw them for what they really were: systematic exploitation. The most infuriating entries were labeled Sarah Emergency, new clothes for job interviews that never happened, rent for her downtown studio apartment because she couldn't possibly live at home after college, groceries because cooking is hard, medical bills for routine checkups because she forgot to pay them. Even her Netflix and Spotify subscriptions were automatically charged to my credit card. I had been covering their entire lifestyle while living in a modest one-bedroom apartment and driving a 7-year-old Honda Civic. Meanwhile, Sarah drove a brand new BMW and lived in a luxury building with a doorman and rooftop pool. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Mom said you were being weird about my car. It's not that expensive and you make good money." That was it. I typed back, "Fine, I'll leave and you can start paying your own bills. Check your bank tomorrow. Simple as that." I spent the next 2 hours going through my online banking, canceling every automatic payment that had my family's name on it. Mortgage payment canceled, insurance canceled, car loan canceled, credit card payments canceled, Sarah's rent, utilities, phone bill, gym membership all canceled. With each click of the cancel button, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. I had been so accustomed to living paycheck to paycheck despite my $65,000 salary as a marketing director that I had forgotten what financial freedom felt like. The apartment suddenly felt different, lighter somehow. I looked around at my sparse furniture and realized that for the first time in my adult life, I would actually be able to afford nice things for myself, maybe even save money for the future. I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my small balcony overlooking the city. The cool November air felt refreshing against my face. Tomorrow would bring chaos, I was certain of that. My family had never had to face the reality of their financial situation because I had been their safety net for so long. But tonight, for the first time in years, I felt free. My phone started ringing around 10 p.m. David calling, then Linda, then Sarah. I let them all go to voicemail and went to bed early, sleeping better than I had in months. I woke up the next morning to 37 missed calls and 42 text messages. The panic had set in. The first sign that my family was taking this seriously came at 6:15 a.m. when my phone started buzzing with a call from an unknown number. When I answered, Linda's frantic voice came through the speaker. "Tammy, what have you done? The mortgage payment bounced and David's freaking out. We got an overdraft fee and the bank is calling asking about automatic payments." I had been expecting this moment for hours. I canceled my payments to your accounts just like I said I would. But you can't do that. We depend on that money. Exactly the problem, Mom. You're 49 years old and Dad is 52. You should be depending on your own income, not mine. Linda's voice turned sharp and manipulative, a tone I knew well from childhood. Fine, be selfish. But what about Sarah? She's still young and finding herself. You're crushing her dreams. Sarah is 25 years old. Most people her age have been working full-time jobs for years. The call ended with Linda hanging up on me, but I knew this was just the beginning. By lunchtime, the manipulation campaign was in full swing. Sarah appeared at my office building, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the sunlight as she sobbed dramatically in the lobby. She had always been beautiful in that effortless way that made people want to help her, and she knew exactly how to use it. Tammy, please, you're destroying our family, she wailed loud enough for everyone in the marble-floored space to hear. I don't understand what I did wrong. Mom and Dad are crying at home and saying we might lose the house. My coworkers were starting to stare their curious glances, making my cheeks burn with embarrassment. I guided Sarah to a quiet corner near the elevators. You didn't do anything wrong except refuse to take responsibility for your own life, I said quietly. I'm not your personal bank account, Sarah. Her tears dried up, instantly replaced by the cold calculation I had learned to recognize over the years. Whatever, I'll figure something out. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've ruined everything. That afternoon, my best friend Jessica called me with concern in her voice. Your mom called me saying you're having some kind of breakdown. She asked if I could talk to you about getting professional help. The audacity was breathtaking. Jessica, I canceled my automatic payments to my family because they told me my purpose in life is to fund my sister's lifestyle. That's not a breakdown, that's called setting boundaries. Oh, Jessica's tone shifted immediately. That's not how your mom explained it. She said you suddenly cut them off without warning and that your dad might lose his job because of stress. I spent 20 minutes explaining the real situation to Jessica, who became increasingly angry on my behalf as she learned the truth. By the end of the conversation, she was apologizing for believing Linda's version of events. But the manipulation campaign was just getting started. Over the next week, my family launched a coordinated assault on my sanity. David started showing up at my favorite coffee shop on 5th Street, timing his appearances with my morning routine. He would sit at nearby tables looking pathetic and wounded, occasionally catching my eye and shaking his head sadly. When that didn't work, he cornered me one morning while I was waiting for my latte. I hope you're happy, he said, his voice loud enough for other customers to hear. Your mother cried herself to sleep last night worrying about losing our home, the home you grew up in, the home where you learned to ride a bike in the driveway and had birthday parties in the backyard. Dad, you chose to take out a mortgage you couldn't afford without my income. That's not my responsibility. Family takes care of family, Tommy. I thought we raised you better than this. The guilt hit like a physical blow, just as it was designed to. For a moment, I almost wavered, almost pulled out my phone to transfer money to their account. But then I remembered his words from Thanksgiving dinner. Sarah was born to live soft. Your job is to make money for her. You raised me to be a bank account with legs, I replied. Well, this bank account is now closed. The coffee shop had gone quiet, with other customers pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. David's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. You'll regret this, he muttered before storming out. The social media campaign started the next day. Linda began posting passive-aggressive messages about children who abandon their families during difficult times and the pain of ungrateful offspring. Sarah shared articles about toxic daughters and family loyalty. But the lowest blow came when Sarah created a GoFundMe page titled, Help a Family Abandoned by Their Daughter. The description painted me as a heartless person who had suddenly cut off financial support to a disabled family. She used a 10-year-old photo of David with his back brace from a minor construction injury that had healed years ago, making him look frail and dependent. The page raised $300 in the first day, mostly from distant relatives and family friends who didn't know the real story. Each donation comment felt like a knife twist. "So sorry your daughter turned out this way. Family is everything, shame on her. Hope you find the support you need." I was furious, but I was also prepared. For months, I had been using a call recording app on my phone, suspicious that this day might come. I had hours of conversations where my family discussed me in terms that would shock anyone who heard them. On Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after the GoFundMe went live, I uploaded a carefully edited compilation to social media. My family's voices were crystal clear as they laughed about milking the golden goose and debated whether they should ask me to pay for Sarah's upcoming vacation to Hawaii. The most damning clip was from September when I had called to check on Linda after she claimed to have the flu. She had forgotten I was on speakerphone when she told David, "She's so gullible. I wasn't even sick. I just wanted money for those boots I saw online." Another clip captured Sarah telling a friend, "My sister is basically my personal ATM. She feels guilty if she doesn't pay for stuff, so I just have to act helpless and sad." The reaction was swift and brutal. The GoFundMe was flooded with angry comments from people demanding refunds. Sarah's social media was bombarded with messages calling her a scammer and a fraud. Linda's passive-aggressive posts were met with screenshots of the audio clips and demands for accountability. Within 24 hours, the GoFundMe page was taken down and all donations were refunded. My family's reputation in our small community was in ruins. But I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. With her online fundraising scheme destroyed and no money flowing from my accounts, Sarah was forced to confront a reality she had never faced before she needed a job. I heard about her employment adventures through mutual friends who found her attempts at joining the workforce both amusing and concerning. Her first application was at a boutique marketing firm downtown where she listed social media influencer as her primary qualification, despite having only 237 Instagram followers, most of whom were family members and high school acquaintances. The interview, according to Jessica, who knew someone who worked there, was a disaster. When asked about her marketing experience, Sarah launched into a story about how she had influenced me to pay for her lifestyle for years, apparently believing this demonstrated strategic thinking. She actually said she had experience in persuasion marketing because she could convince her sister to fund her expenses, Jessica reported with disbelief. The interviewer asked for examples of campaigns she had worked on, and she described convincing you to pay for her apartment as if it was a professional achievement. Sarah's next attempt was at a local restaurant that desperately needed servers due to the holiday season. She lasted exactly 3 days. The manager, a woman named Carol, whom I met at my gym, shared the story during our Tuesday evening workout. She came in dressed like she was going to a nightclub with high heels and a full face of makeup for a breakfast shift. When I explained that she would need to clean tables, take orders, and carry heavy trays, she looked at me like I had suggested she perform surgery. On her second day, Sarah apparently asked if she could work only the fun parts of the job, like greeting customers, while other servers handled the dirty work of cleaning and food service. When Carol explained that wasn't how restaurants operated, Sarah accused her of discrimination. She said it was unfair to expect someone with her background to do manual labor. Carol continued, shaking her head. When I asked what her background was, she said she came from a family where other people handled those kinds of tasks. The final straw came on day 3 when Sarah was caught taking selfies in the restaurant's bathroom during the lunch rush, posting them to Instagram with captions about grinding and building her empire. She quit when Carol asked her to put her phone away and focus on her tables. Meanwhile, my parents were discovering their own harsh realities. Linda applied for additional shifts at the department store where she worked part-time, only to be told that her availability was too limited and her performance reviews were mediocre. Her manager informed her that she would need to demonstrate more reliability before being considered for full-time status. David's construction work had always been sporadic, but now the family desperately needed consistent income. His 10-year-old back injury, which had been miraculously manageable when I was paying the bills, suddenly became a convenient excuse for why he couldn't take on more physically demanding projects. However, when the credit card companies started calling about missed minimum payments, David's back problems seemed to improve remarkably. He began taking on weekend projects and advertising his services more aggressively on neighborhood social media groups. The stress of their financial situation was beginning to show. Linda started working double shifts at the department store, coming home exhausted and irritable. David would spend evenings hunched over a calculator trying to figure out how to stretch their combined income of roughly $3,000 per month to cover expenses that had previously totaled over $5,000 with my contributions. Their social media posts shifted from passive-aggressive comments about ungrateful children to desperate attempts to sell household items. Linda listed her jewelry collection online, describing pieces as barely worn and perfect for the holidays. David posted photos of his tools with captions like downsizing due to life changes. But Sarah remained in complete denial about the family's financial crisis. While her parents scrambled to make ends meet, Sarah continued living as if nothing had changed. She kept her expensive apartment, maintained her gym membership, and went out to restaurants several times a week. When questioned about how she was affording this lifestyle, she would vaguely mention savings or investments. The truth was more disturbing than any of us realized at the time. 3 weeks after I had cut off the family finances, I was working late at my office when my phone rang with a call from Minneapolis Police Department. The officer on the line explained that Sarah had been arrested for attempting to use a credit card that had been flagged for suspicious activity. "The card is registered under your name, ma'am," Officer Johnson explained. "The suspect claims to be your sister and says she has permission to use your accounts." My blood turned cold. I did not give her permission to use any of my credit cards. "We're going to need you to come down to the station to file a formal complaint. The suspect tried to purchase a purse valued at over $1,000 at a luxury boutique in downtown Minneapolis." During the drive to the police station, my mind raced through the implications. Sarah had memorized my credit card information during the years when I had freely shared my financial resources with the family. I had trusted her enough to let her use my cards for emergency purchases, never imagining she would continue using them without permission. At the station, I learned the full scope of Sarah's deception. The investigating detective, a serious woman named Detective Rodriguez, showed me a list of transactions that made my stomach churn. "We've been tracking suspicious activity on your accounts for the past 2 weeks," she explained. "Small purchases at first, things that might not trigger immediate attention. Coffee shops, grocery stores, gas stations, but the amounts have been increasing." The evidence was overwhelming. Security camera footage showed Sarah confidently using cards registered in my name at multiple locations. When confronted by store employees about the name mismatch, she would claim to be Tommy's assistant or shopping for her sister. "The most concerning aspect," Detective Rodriguez continued, "is that we found evidence she has been forging your signature on checks as well. Your bank flagged several suspicious endorsements over the past month." I stared at the photocopied checks, each one bearing a clumsy imitation of my signature. The amounts ranged from $50 to $300, small enough to avoid immediate detection, but significant enough to impact my account balance. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, dreading the answer. "Based on our preliminary investigation, possibly for years. We're going to need you to review your financial statements going back at least 12 months to identify all unauthorized transactions." The betrayal cut deeper than anything my family had done before. This wasn't just financial dependence or emotional manipulation. This was criminal behavior. Sarah had been stealing from me while I voluntarily supported her lifestyle, apparently believing she was entitled to my money regardless of my consent. As I signed the complaint paperwork, Officer Johnson explained the potential charges: credit card fraud, identity theft, check forgery, and grand theft. Given the amount involved and the duration of the activity, these are felony charges. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in. My sister wasn't just spoiled or entitled. She was a criminal who had been systematically stealing from me for years. When I left the police station, I felt a strange combination of vindication and sadness. I had been right to cut off my family's access to my finances, but the cost of that decision was higher than I had imagined. Sarah was going to face serious legal consequences, and there would be no going back from this point. The arrest changed everything. Within hours of Sarah being booked, news of the charges spread through our extended family and social circles like wildfire. The same relatives who had criticized me for abandoning my family were now calling to apologize and express their shock at Sarah's criminal behavior. But my immediate family was still in denial. Linda called me from the police station parking lot, her voice shaking with a combination of fear and rage. "How could you do this to your own sister? She made a mistake, but having her arrested is going too far. Mom, she committed multiple felonies. I didn't make this choice, she did. She's your baby sister. She's confused and scared, and you're destroying her future over money." The conversation ended when I reminded Linda that Sarah was 25 years old and that stealing someone's identity wasn't a mistake, it was a calculated crime. David was even more difficult to deal with. He showed up at my apartment building that evening, demanding that I drop the charges and handle this within the family. When I refused to let him up to my apartment, he stood in the lobby shouting loud enough for the entire building to hear. "She's going to have a criminal record because of you," he yelled. "What kind of sister destroys her own family?" Security eventually escorted him out, but not before several neighbors witnessed the spectacle. I was mortified, but also relieved that other people could see the toxic dynamics I had been dealing with for years. Meanwhile, the financial situation at my parents' house was deteriorating rapidly. The first major blow came when the mortgage payment bounced for the second consecutive month. The bank sent a formal notice of default, giving them 30 days to bring their account current or face foreclosure proceedings. David and Linda owed over $3,600 in missed payments, late fees, and penalties. Their combined monthly income was barely enough to cover their basic living expenses, let alone catch up on the mortgage. Linda's jewelry sold for far less than she had hoped. The pieces she had treasured for decades brought in only $800, mostly from a pawn shop that offered rock-bottom prices for estate jewelry. David's tools fetched slightly better returns, but selling them meant he could no longer take on larger construction projects that required specialized equipment. The credit card companies were relentless. Phone calls came throughout the day demanding payment on balances that had grown steadily over the years of minimum payments and accumulated interest. Linda's part-time retail job provided health insurance but barely covered groceries and utilities. David's sporadic construction work was insufficient to bridge the gap between their income and their obligations. His back injury, conveniently forgotten during the crisis, returned with a vengeance when the stress of their situation made physical labor more difficult. But the most devastating blow came 3 weeks after Sarah's arrest. I was working late at my office, focusing on a marketing campaign for a new client, when my phone rang with a call from Hennepin County General Hospital. Linda had been brought to the emergency room after suffering what appeared to be a severe panic attack at work. She was found hyperventilating in the employee break room, the nurse explained. Her blood pressure was dangerously elevated, and she was experiencing chest pains. Despite everything that had happened, I felt a stab of genuine concern. Whatever else Linda might be, she was still my mother, and the thought of her in a hospital bed was frightening. I arrived at the emergency room to find David sitting in the waiting area with his head in his hands. He looked older than his 52 years, his face drawn and his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "She collapsed at work," he said without looking up. "They think it's stress-related, but they're running tests to make sure it's not her heart." Linda was conscious when I was allowed to see her, but she looked fragile and pale against the white hospital sheets. Monitoring equipment beeped steadily in the background as she turned tired eyes toward me. "I can't take it anymore," she whispered. "The bills, the phone calls, Sarah's legal problems. I don't know how to fix any of this." For a moment, I felt the old familiar pull to rescue her to solve all her problems with a transfer from my bank account. But then I remembered her voice from Thanksgiving dinner, coldly informing me that my purpose was to fund Sarah's lifestyle. Mom, you guys created this situation by living beyond your means and teaching Sarah that she was entitled to money she didn't earn. But we're going to lose the house, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. We've lived there for 15 years. All your childhood memories are in that house. The emotional manipulation was subtle but unmistakable. She was trying to make me responsible for preserving not just their financial stability but our family history itself. You can downsize to something you can actually afford, I replied gently but firmly. Lots of families live in apartments or smaller homes. It's not the end of the world. Linda turned away from me, facing the wall. I never thought my own daughter would watch us lose everything and not care. The guilt was overwhelming, but I forced myself to remember that caring and enabling were two different things. I could care about my mother's well-being without taking responsibility for choices she and David had made long before this crisis. The medical tests revealed that Linda's panic attack had been triggered by chronic stress and elevated blood pressure. The doctor recommended lifestyle changes, stress management, and regular monitoring of her cardiovascular health. But when the discharge paperwork was processed, the family faced another devastating reality. Their health insurance had lapsed due to missed payments, and the emergency room visit resulted in a bill for over $2,000. David sat in the hospital billing office staring at the invoice with complete bewilderment. I don't understand how this happened, he kept repeating. We've always had insurance. The insurance I had been paying for, along with their mortgage, car payments, credit cards, utilities, and property taxes. For the first time, I think my parents truly understood how much of their life had been subsidized by my income. They weren't just losing luxury items or convenience. They were facing homelessness, medical debt, and the complete collapse of the middle-class lifestyle they had maintained for over a decade. The house they had lived in since I was 13 years old, with the kitchen where Linda had taught me to bake cookies, and the backyard where David had built a treehouse for Sarah and me, was going to be foreclosed on within 60 days. As I drove home that night, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and relief. Sad that my family's financial house of cards was finally falling down, but relieved that I was no longer trapped underneath it. For the first time in my adult life, I had money in my savings account. Real money that could be used for my own future instead of perpetually bailing out people who refused to take responsibility for their choices. But I also knew that my family's crisis was far from over. The foreclosure would destroy their credit rating for years. Sarah was facing potential jail time, and somehow in their minds all of this was my fault for refusing to continue funding their unsustainable lifestyle. The real test of my resolve was yet to come. While my family's world crumbled around them, I was experiencing a kind of rebirth that I had never imagined possible. The first major change was financial, and the difference was staggering. With an extra $3,200 remaining in my bank account each month, I could suddenly afford things that had been impossible dreams for years. I started small, a new winter coat that actually fit properly instead of the clearance rack special I had been wearing for 4 seasons. Fresh flowers for my apartment every week, a tiny luxury that made my living space feel warm and welcoming. Organic groceries instead of whatever was cheapest at the discount store. But the real transformation came when I realized I could finally pursue goals I had abandoned years ago. I had always dreamed of returning to school for my MBA, but between supporting my family and barely covering my own expenses, graduate school had seemed financially impossible. Now, with my newfound financial freedom, I researched programs at the University of Minnesota and discovered I could afford evening classes while continuing to work. The application process felt like stepping into a new version of myself. For years, I had defined my success by how well I could meet other people's needs. Now, I was setting goals based on my own ambitions and interests. My work performance improved dramatically once I wasn't constantly interrupted by family financial crises. Before cutting ties, my phone would buzz throughout the day with texts from Sarah asking for money transfers or calls from Linda about overdue bills. The mental energy required to manage their ongoing emergencies had been exhausting. Now I could focus completely on my marketing projects. I started taking on additional responsibilities, volunteering for challenging assignments, and proposing innovative campaigns to my supervisors. My productivity skyrocketed, and my colleagues began to notice. "You seem different lately," my manager Kate observed during our monthly check-in meeting. "More confident, more engaged with the work." She was right. Without the constant stress of family financial drama weighing on my mind, I felt sharper and more creative. I was sleeping better, eating healthier, and genuinely enjoying my career for the first time in years. The promotion came sooner than I had expected. Kate called me into her office on a Tuesday morning in January, just 2 months after my family crisis had begun. "We're creating a senior marketing director position," she explained, "and everyone agrees you're the ideal candidate. The role comes with increased responsibility for strategic planning and a salary increase to $78,000 annually." I stared at her in shock. A $13,000 raise would have been unimaginable when I was supporting my entire family. Now it felt like winning the lottery. "There's also a signing bonus of $5,000, Kate continued, "and you'll be eligible for performance-based bonuses starting next quarter." Walking out of Kate's office, I felt like I was floating. Not only was I excelling professionally, but I was also building the kind of financial stability that would allow me to pursue my long-term dreams. My personal life was transforming as well. I started saying yes to social invitations that I had declined for years due to lack of money or energy. My coworkers included me in their weekend plans, and I discovered that I actually enjoyed going to museums, trying new restaurants, and attending cultural events around Minneapolis. Jessica introduced me to her book club, a group of professional women in their 20s and 30s who met monthly to discuss literature and life. For the first time, I was socializing with people who saw me as Tommy the person, not Tommy the family ATM. "You're so much more relaxed than you used to be," Jessica observed after one of our book club meetings. "I didn't realize how stressed you were all the time." I hadn't realized it either. The constant pressure of managing my family's financial needs had become so normalized that I had forgotten what it felt like to live without that weight on my shoulders. But the most unexpected change came when I met Marcus. He was standing in line behind me at a coffee shop near the university campus where I was attending evening MBA classes. When I struggled to balance my laptop bag, purse, and coffee while searching for my car keys, he quietly held my coffee until I got organized. "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful for the simple kindness. "No problem," he replied with a warm smile. "Are you a student at the university?" We talked for nearly an hour in the coffee shop parking lot, covering everything from career goals to favorite books. Marcus was a forensic accountant specializing in financial fraud cases, and his work involved investigating corporate embezzlement and white-collar crime. He was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly straightforward about his own life and ambitions. When he asked for my phone number, I said yes without the usual anxiety that had accompanied dating attempts during my family supporting years. Our first date was a revelation. We went to a modest restaurant in downtown Minneapolis, and when the check arrived, Marcus insisted on paying. When I protested, he said something that nearly brought tears to my eyes. "I asked you out, so dinner is my treat. That's how this works." Such a simple concept, but I had become so accustomed to being the person who paid for everything that having someone else take care of a meal felt almost foreign. Marcus was genuinely interested in my thoughts, my goals, and my experiences. He listened when I talked about my marketing work and asked thoughtful questions about my MBA studies. He treated me as an equal partner in our conversations, not as someone whose primary value was financial. On our third date, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I told him about my family situation. I expected judgment advice, or at least some discomfort with the complexity of my circumstances. Instead, Marcus listened carefully to the entire story and then said, "It sounds like you made a really difficult but necessary choice. That took courage." Nobody had ever framed my decision in terms of courage before. My family saw it as betrayal, abandonment, or selfishness. But Marcus understood that setting boundaries with financially abusive relatives required strength, not weakness. As winter turned to spring, my new life gained momentum. I moved from my cramped one-bedroom apartment to a beautiful two-bedroom condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the downtown skyline. For the first time in my adult life, I had space for a home office where I could study for my MBA classes. The condo came with amenities I had never experienced: a fitness center, a rooftop deck, and underground parking. Small luxuries that felt almost decadent after years of financial constraint. My relationship with Marcus deepened as we discovered shared interests and compatible life goals. He was ambitious, but not ruthless, successful, but not arrogant. He treated me with consistent respect and genuine affection. When I hesitantly mentioned that I had never had a romantic partner who didn't eventually ask me for money, Marcus looked genuinely confused. "Why would I ask you for money?" he said. "I have my own career and my own income. I want to be with you because I enjoy your company, not because I need financial support." The concept was so foreign to my family experience that it took time to fully accept. But gradually, I began to understand what healthy relationships actually looked like. Marcus celebrated my successes without trying to claim credit or ask for rewards. He supported my MBA studies by bringing me dinner during late study sessions and helping me practice presentations. He encouraged my career ambitions without expecting anything in return. But the most profound change was internal. I was developing a sense of self-worth that wasn't tied to my ability to solve other people's problems with money. For years, I had confused love with financial utility. I thought people cared about me because I was useful to them. Now I was learning that authentic relationships were based on mutual respect, shared interests, and genuine affection. Marcus liked me for who I was, not what I could provide. My apartment reflected this new sense of self. I bought artwork that I loved, plants that made me happy, and furniture that was comfortable rather than practical. I created a space that felt like home, rather than just a place to sleep between work shifts and family obligations. But even as my new life flourished, I knew that my family's crisis was far from resolved. Sarah was still facing criminal charges, my parents were still struggling with foreclosure, and none of them had accepted responsibility for their roles in creating this situation. I had successfully extracted myself from their dysfunction, but the real test would come when they inevitably tried to pull me back in. The calm of my new life shattered on a Tuesday morning in March when my family decided to make one final desperate attempt to regain control over my finances. I was reviewing quarterly marketing reports when the receptionist at my office called to inform me that my family was in the lobby requesting to see me. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see David, Linda, and Sarah standing near the elevators, their faces set with determination. My heart rate spiked as I realized they had coordinated this ambush to maximize embarrassment and pressure. They knew I would be reluctant to cause a scene at my workplace, and they were counting on professional politeness to force me into a conversation I didn't want to have. I walked downstairs with my supervisor, Kate, by my side, wanting a witness to whatever was about to unfold. "Tammy," Linda called out loudly as soon as she spotted me, her voice echoing through the marble lobby. "We need to talk to you about this family emergency." "There's no family emergency," I replied calmly, acutely aware that my colleagues and clients were watching this drama unfold. "Please leave my workplace immediately." David stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "Your mother ended up in the hospital because of the stress you've caused this family. We're about to lose our home. Your sister is facing criminal charges, and you're living in luxury while we suffer." The stress I caused, I kept my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. "I didn't max out your credit cards or teach Sarah to steal identities." Sarah burst into dramatic tears that looked practiced rather than genuine. "I made a mistake." One tiny mistake, and you're destroying my entire future. What kind of sister prosecutes her own family? The lobby was now completely silent except for Sarah's theatrical sobbing. Other people were pretending to check their phones while obviously listening to every word. Identity theft and credit card fraud aren't tiny mistakes, I responded. They're felonies. Linda's voice took on the manipulative tone I knew so well from childhood. Families forgive each other, Tammy. They work through problems together instead of running to the police like strangers. Families also don't steal from each other for years while pretending to be victims. The confrontation was escalating exactly as they had planned. They wanted me to feel ashamed and guilty in front of my professional colleagues, hoping that public embarrassment would force me back into my role as the family bank account. Security arrived within minutes professionally, but firmly escorting my family from the building. As they were led toward the exit, David shouted back at me with enough volume for the entire lobby to hear. "You'll regret this when we're homeless. Your own parents living on the street because their daughter cares more about money than family." The lobby remained quiet for several long moments after they left. Kate placed a supportive hand on my shoulder and suggested we return to my office to debrief. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," she said once we were alone. "That looked incredibly difficult." "It was, but I'm glad you witnessed it. Now you understand why I don't talk about my family much." Kate nodded thoughtfully. "It explains a lot about your work ethic and your reluctance to take time off. You've been dealing with this kind of pressure for years." The workplace ambush was humiliating, but it was only the beginning of their final assault on my independence. That evening, I returned to my condo building to find David, Linda, and Sarah sitting in the lobby with suitcases and shopping bags piled around them. They had somehow convinced the doorman to let them wait inside, spinning some story about being my family members who needed urgent assistance. "We've been evicted," Linda announced dramatically as soon as she saw me. "The foreclosure happened faster than expected, and we have nowhere else to go." I looked at their luggage and realized they had planned this manipulation carefully. They were gambling that I wouldn't let my own parents sleep in their car regardless of how angry I was about their financial abuse. "There are shelters, there are affordable apartments, and there are family members with guest rooms," I replied. "You have options that don't involve moving into my home." Sarah's tears started again, but this time they seemed more genuine than her office performance. "Please, Tammy, we just need a few weeks to get back on our feet. We won't be any trouble." The request was absurd on multiple levels. My condo was a 2-bedroom unit with 1 bathroom. Even if I wanted to help them, which I didn't, there wasn't enough physical space for 4 adults to live comfortably. More importantly, letting them move in would undo all the progress I had made toward financial and emotional independence. Within days, they would be treating my home like their own, expecting me to cover their food utilities and transportation costs. "No," I said firmly. "You cannot move in with me. You need to find your own housing solution." David's voice turned cold and threatening. "Fine, but don't expect us to be there when you need family support. Don't expect us to be part of your wedding or your future children's lives. You're choosing money over your own blood." The threat hit harder than I expected. Despite everything that had happened, some part of me still craved their approval and acceptance. The thought of permanent estrangement from my family was genuinely painful. But I had learned enough about manipulation tactics to recognize this for what it was: emotional blackmail designed to make me prioritize their comfort over my well-being. "I'm choosing my own mental health and financial stability," I corrected. "You're welcome to be part of my life when you're ready to treat me as a person instead of an ATM." They spent another hour in my lobby, alternating between tears, accusations, and threats. Eventually, building security asked them to leave, and they loaded their belongings into David's pickup truck while muttering loudly about heartless daughters and family betrayal. But their campaign wasn't finished yet. The next morning, Marcus called me with concern in his voice. "I just got a very strange phone call from someone claiming to be your mother. She said some pretty alarming things about you." My blood ran cold. "What did she say?" She warned me that you have a history of financial abuse and theft. She claimed you stole money from your family and said I should be careful about giving you access to my accounts or credit cards. The audacity was breathtaking. Linda was projecting Sarah's criminal behavior onto me, trying to destroy my relationship with the first person who had ever treated me as an equal partner. She also said you have mental health issues that make you unstable in relationships. Marcus continued. She suggested I do a background check on you before we get more serious. I was shaking with rage and fear. After everything I had endured, they were now trying to sabotage the healthiest relationship I had ever experienced. Marcus, none of that is true. You know about my family situation. You know why I cut off their finances. I know, he said gently, but I wanted you to be aware that she called. She seemed pretty determined to convince me that you're dangerous. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes with Marcus reassuring me that Linda's accusations only confirmed what he already knew about my family's manipulative behavior. But there was something in his tone that hadn't been there before. A carefulness, a slight emotional distance that suggested Linda's poison had at least partially found its mark. That night, I lay awake wondering if my family's interference would eventually destroy my relationship with Marcus. They had already cost me years of financial stability, career advancement, and personal growth. Now they were actively trying to sabotage my chance at romantic happiness. For the first time since cutting them off, I seriously considered whether maintaining my boundaries was worth the ongoing cost. Maybe it would be easier to just give them what they wanted and accept my role as the family provider. At least then I would have peace. But as I thought about returning to my old life of financial servitude, I realized how much I had changed over the past few months. I had experienced what it felt like to live without constant stress, to pursue my own goals, and to be valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. Going back to funding my family's lifestyle would mean abandoning the person I was finally becoming. Whatever happened with Marcus, whatever threats my family made, whatever guilt and manipulation they employed, I couldn't return to being their personal bank account. The battle for my independence was far from over, but I was no longer the same person who had walked out of that Thanksgiving dinner. I was stronger, smarter, and more determined than ever to protect the life I had built. They could continue their attacks, but I would not surrender my freedom again. 6 months after that terrible Thanksgiving dinner, justice had finally caught up with my family's behavior, and I was living a life I had never dared to imagine. Sarah's legal troubles had escalated beyond simple credit card fraud. The forensic investigation into her criminal activity revealed a pattern of identity theft that stretched back nearly 3 years. She had been systematically using my personal information to open store credit cards, take out small loans, and even attempt to lease a luxury car. The prosecution was thorough and unforgiving. Sarah pled guilty to multiple felony charges, including identity theft, credit card fraud, and check forgery. Her sentence included 18 months of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution of over $12,000 for the money she had stolen. More importantly, for my peace of mind, Sarah was required to attend financial literacy classes and counseling for behavioral issues. The judge had been particularly stern about the family dynamics that had enabled her criminal behavior. "Young lady," Judge Harrison had said during the sentencing hearing, "you are 25 years old and you have been treating your sister like a personal bank account for years. This court hopes that your punishment will help you understand the value of honest work and personal responsibility." David and Linda had attended every court hearing, sitting in the gallery with expressions of wounded martyrdom. They still insisted that Sarah's crimes were somehow my fault for abandoning the family during a difficult time. But the rest of our extended family had finally seen the truth. Aunt Martha, who had initially criticized me for cutting off family support, called to apologize after learning the full scope of Sarah's criminal behavior. "I had no idea how bad things had gotten," she admitted. "I thought you were being selfish, but now I understand you were protecting yourself from people who were stealing from you." Uncle Robert, Linda's brother, was even more direct in his assessment. Linda and David created this monster, he told me during a phone conversation. They taught Sarah that she was entitled to money she didn't earn, and now she's facing jail time because of their poor parenting. The house foreclosure had proceeded as expected. David and Linda lost their suburban home and were forced to move into a small two-bedroom apartment in a less expensive neighborhood. The downsizing was traumatic for them, but it was also the first time in over a decade that their housing costs matched their actual income. Linda had been forced to take a full-time position at a different retail store, working 40 hours per week for the first time since Sarah was born. David's construction work had become more consistent out of pure necessity, and his mysterious back problems had largely disappeared once the family's survival depended on his labor. The stress of their financial reality had initially caused significant tension in their marriage. Linda blamed David for not earning enough money. David blamed Linda for her spending habits, and both of them blamed me for refusing to continue subsidizing their unsustainable lifestyle. But eventually they began to adapt to their new circumstances. Linda discovered that she was actually quite good at retail management and had been promoted to assistant supervisor at her store. David's construction business was growing as he focused more energy on building his reputation and client base. For the first time in years, they were living within their means and taking responsibility for their own financial decisions. Meanwhile, my life had continued to flourish in ways that exceeded my wildest dreams. The promotion at work had opened doors to opportunities I had never considered. I was leading strategic marketing initiatives for major clients representing my company at industry conferences and building a professional reputation based on my skills rather than my availability to solve other people's problems. My MBA program was challenging but rewarding. I was particularly drawn to courses on organizational psychology and leadership development areas that felt personally relevant after my experiences with family dynamics and boundary setting. But the most significant development was my relationship with Marcus. 6 months after that first coffee shop encounter, he proposed to me during a weekend trip to the North Shore. We were hiking along Lake Superior when he stopped at a scenic overlook and pulled out a simple but elegant ring. "I love you for exactly who you are," he said, getting down on one knee. "Your intelligence, your strength, your compassion, and your courage. You've shown me what it means to stand up for yourself while still caring about others." I said yes through tears of joy, finally understanding what it felt like to be loved for who I was rather than what I could provide. The most surprising aspect of our relationship was Marcus's professional expertise. As a forensic accountant, he specialized in investigating exactly the kind of financial abuse I had experienced with my family. "What your family did to you is more common than you might think," he explained one evening as we planned our wedding. "Financial abuse within families often goes unreported because victims feel guilty about prosecuting relatives." He had been discreetly documenting my family's behavior since our early conversations, not out of suspicion toward me, but out of professional concern about the patterns I described. When my family had contacted him with their lies and warnings, Marcus had already compiled enough evidence to understand exactly what kind of manipulation they were attempting. "They called me hoping I would see you the way they do," he said, "as someone who exists to solve their problems with money. But I see you as a person who had the courage to break free from people who were exploiting your kindness." Our wedding was small but perfect, held at a lakeside venue with close friends and supportive family members. Aunt Martha attended along with several cousins who had maintained relationships with me despite the family drama. Uncle Robert walked me down the aisle since David had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with my betrayal of the family. Linda, David, and Sarah were not invited. This decision had been difficult but necessary for my mental health and the success of my new marriage. The most profound change in my life was psychological. I had spent years believing that my value as a person was tied to my ability to solve other people's financial problems. I thought love meant sacrifice, that family meant obligation, and that boundaries were selfish. Now I understood that healthy relationships were based on mutual respect, that love didn't have a price tag, and that protecting my well-being wasn't selfish, but essential for my ability to contribute positively to the world. I started volunteering with a local nonprofit organization that helped people escape financially abusive relationships. My story resonated with other victims who had been conditioned to believe that their primary value was economic rather than personal. The hardest part, I would tell support groups, is learning to trust your own judgment when people you love are telling you that your boundaries are wrong. Many of the women in these groups had experienced similar family dynamics. Parents who expected adult children to fund their lifestyle, siblings who refused to work because someone else would always bail them out, spouses who treated their partners like personal ATMs. The common thread was always the same people who had been taught to confuse love with financial obligation and who needed permission to put their own well-being first. Through this volunteer work, I discovered that my experience had given me valuable insights into the psychology of financial abuse and the process of establishing healthy boundaries. 1 year after our wedding, Marcus and I bought a house in a quiet suburb outside Minneapolis. It was a modest 3-bedroom home with a large backyard and plenty of space for the family we hoped to start someday. As we moved into our new home, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed since that awful Thanksgiving dinner. I had gone from being a financially exploited family member with no savings and constant stress to a successful professional with a loving marriage, advanced education, and genuine financial security. My family had gone from being financially dependent and entitled to being self-sufficient and responsible for their own choices. Sarah had learned through legal consequences that stealing from people had real-world repercussions that couldn't be solved by tears or manipulation. David and Linda had discovered that they were capable of supporting themselves when they had no choice but to do so. The most important lesson I had learned was that setting boundaries wasn't cruel or selfish. It was an act of love that allowed everyone involved to grow into better versions of themselves. By refusing to continue enabling my family's financial irresponsibility, I had forced them to develop skills and independence they never would have achieved otherwise. By protecting my own financial and emotional well-being, I had created space in my life for healthy relationships, professional success, and personal growth. The woman who had walked out of that Thanksgiving dinner was scared, angry, and uncertain about the future. The woman writing this story 1 year later was confident, successful, and surrounded by people who valued her for who she was rather than what she could provide. True family members support each other's growth and celebrate each other's successes. They don't exploit kindness or mistake love for financial obligation. Anyone who treats you like an ATM rather than a person doesn't deserve access to your life regardless of whether you share DNA with them. The most loving thing you can do for people who are exploiting you is to stop enabling their behavior and force them to take responsibility for their own choices. Setting boundaries isn't about punishing others. It's about protecting yourself and creating space for authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. If you're currently dealing with family members or loved ones who treat you like a personal bank account, please know that you have the right to say no. You have the right to keep your money for your own goals and dreams. You have the right to be loved for who you are rather than what you can provide. It won't be easy, and they will likely try to make you feel guilty or selfish for protecting yourself. But your well-being matters, your goals matter, and your future matters. You deserve relationships where you're valued as a person, not as a source of funding for other people's poor choices. The courage to set boundaries with people who are financially exploiting you isn't selfish. It's the first step toward building a life where you're truly free to become the person you were meant to be. My story ended with justice, love, and the deep satisfaction that comes from taking control of your own life. Yours can too. What's the most challenging boundary you've had to set with family members? Have you ever felt guilty for protecting your financial well-being from people who claimed to love you? Share your thoughts in the comments below and remember to like this video if my story resonated with your experiences. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming toxic family dynamics and share this with anyone who might need to hear that they're not selfish for protecting themselves from financial exploitation. Thank you for listening, and I hope my journey helps you find the courage to create the life you deserve.